Lamine Yamal just did something that no Spanish player has ever done before a World Cup semifinal. And what he just did isn't a goal. It's not an assist. It's not a play that everyone is going to remember 50 years from now. It's something way more dangerous than all of that. He opened his mouth, and what came out of his mouth over the last few hours has completely set the entire French camp on fire in a way that no one in the football world expected just 48 hours before the most important semifinal of this World Cup. There's something Lamine said about the Ballon d'Or that Mbappe and Dembélé just can't ignore. There's something Lamine said about France that the French locker room received with a level of fury that sources close to the camp describe as the most intense they've seen in the entire tournament. There's someone in that French locker room who Lamine has an unfinished score to settle with, one that's been open for exactly a year in which that someone hasn't been able to forget what happened, a year in which every single time that name pops up on a TV screen, it reminds him of what Lam did to him in front of the whole world. And there's something else, something the stats of this World Cup say about Lamine that could turn everything he's saying right now into the biggest mistake of his career, or into the most prophetic statement any 18-year-old player has ever made before a match of this magnitude. Stay until the very end, because what's coming up is the most important thing you'll hear before the semi-final between Spain and France. Subscribe if you haven't already. All right, to understand what Lamine just did, we first need to understand who is Lamine Yamal when he speaks before a match against France, because this isn't the first time this has happened before. Exactly a year ago, in the semi-finals of Euro 2024, Adrien Rabiot sat in front of the microphones and said something about Lamine, which at that moment sounded like the usual confidence of a veteran before a big match. He said that Lamine handled pressure really well and was highly talented. Normal stuff so far, but then he added something else. He said that to play in a final of the Euros, Lamine would have to do a lot more than what he had done up to that point. 4 words that went straight to the ears of a 16-year-old kid, who at the time was the player with the most assists in the entire tournament. Lamine heard them, and he responded the only way Lamine knows how to respond when someone challenges him before a match. The night before the game, he posted a story on his Instagram that the football world still remembers. Move in silence. Only speak when it's time to say checkmate. He didn't mention Rabiot, he need to. And then the match arrived. Lamine received the ball on the right side of the box with Rabiot right in front of him and curled a shot that went right in off Maignan far post to score one of the greatest goals in Euro history. After the match, with Spain qualified for the final, Lamine walked up to a camera and said 2 words that Rabiot will never forget in his life: speak now. That is the Lamine Yamal who opened his mouth once again this morning ahead of a semi-final of a World Cup against France. That's the player who, just this morning, said things that the French dressing room simply cannot ignore. And that's exactly why everything that's coming next is going to be so explosive. Do you know what the most important part of all this is? What Lamine actually said. Because this time around, he went way further than he did before the Euros. Way, way further. In the last few hours, Lamine Yamal, across different media outlets and interviews, Lamine Yamal has dropped a series of statements that have taken the football world by storm, spreading like wildfire because nobody expected to hear this just 48 hours before a World Cup semifinal. First of all, when they asked him about France and what he expects from the match, Lamine responded with such blunt clarity that it left the journalists listening completely speechless. If France has to fear any team in this tournament, that team is Spain. He didn't just say Spain could win. He said France needs to be afraid of Spain, not the other way around. Secondly, when they asked him about the possibility of France reaching their 3rd consecutive World Cup final, Lamine responded with a comment that the French dressing room took exactly for what it is: a calculated provocation. There are 2 options. Either France reaches 3 straight finals, or Spain beats them 3 times in a row. Just think about that statement for a second. Lamine is saying that Spain already beat France once in the Euros. He's saying they also beat them in the Nations League. And he's saying Tuesday is going to make it 3. The third 3 straight wins for Spain over France in official competitions. That isn't just confidence. That's a declaration of war. And thirdly, and this one is the most brutal of them all, the one that has triggered the biggest reaction inside the French dressing room over the last few minutes. According to sources close to Lamine's camp, the player reportedly said something about the Ballon d'Or that Mbappe and Dembélé never expected to hear from anyone before this semifinal. That if Spain wins the World Cup, the Ballon d'Or is his, not Mbappe's, who has 8 goals in the tournament and is by far the top scorer, not Dembélé's, who was decisive in the quarterfinals against Morocco. But Lamine's, the one of an 18-year-old player who only owes 1 goal and 2 assists in this tournament, who's had matches where he has completely vanished from the pitch for 45 minutes straight. A player who, in this World Cup, still hasn't delivered that moment, that definitive, crucial moment that defines a tournament the way he did at the Euros with that absolute wonder goal against Maignan. And yet, this morning, he's claiming that if Spain wins the World Cup, the Ballon d'Or is his. Is he right? Or is he making the biggest mistake of his career right before the most important match of his life? That's the question you'll be able to answer by the end of this video. Because before we get to that answer, there's something else we need to analyze. Something that has to do with the one person in the French dressing room who took all of this very differently than Mbappe and Dembélé, and who has a score to settle with Lamine that's been left unsettled for a year. Rabiot, Adrien Rabiot, 30 years old, midfielder for the French national team. The same Rabiot who a year ago said Lamine would have to do a whole lot more to play in a final of the Euros, the very same Rabiot whom Lamine answered with a stunning goal and a speak now to the camera for the whole world to see. The same Rabiot who last night, in the match against Morocco, took the ball with his hand during the play, right before Mbappe's first goal, without the referee calling anything, without VR stepping in, and that same Rabiot who this morning, according to sources close to the French dressing room, took Lamine's comments with an intensity that even his own teammates didn't expect, because Rabiot hasn't forgotten what happened at the Euros. Players at that level don't forget things like that. They don't forget when a 16-year-old kid humiliates them with an absolute screamer in front of millions of people and then looks straight into the camera and tells them to talk now. Rabiot has been waiting a year for this rematch, and now, right before the match where he can finally get it, Lamine takes another shot at him. According to sources close to the French dressing room, Rabiot supposedly said over the last few days something that perfectly sums up how he's feeling ahead of this match. That this time is going to be different. That on Tuesday, Lamine won't have the space he had at the Euros. That on Tuesday, France is going to remind him who he is and the level he's playing at. That's not the whining of a hurt player. That's the motivation of someone who's been holding on to a grudge for a year, keeping it inside. And on Tuesday, he's going to try and pay it back on the pitch. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Because Lamine is right to say that his playing did the talking at the Euros. But the stats from this World Cup say something we just can't ignore. And those stats are exactly what could turn everything Lamine is saying into the biggest mistake of his career or into the most prophetic statement in the history of Spanish football. That's what's coming up next, and it's the most important part of everything we've analyzed so far. Look at the numbers from this World Cup, one by one. Mbappe has 8 goals, 8 in 6 matches. He's the tournament's top scorer, ahead of everyone else. Ahead of Messi, who's got 7, ahead of Haaland, who's got 7, ahead of any other player from any national team in the world, and he's the player Lamine is threatening to steal the Ballon d'Or from. If Spain wins the World Cup, Dembélé has 3 goals and 4 assists. He was France's most decisive player in the quarterfinals against Morocco. He's the player who, when he's on his game, is practically unstoppable for any fullback in the world. And he's the second player Lamine is threatening. Now look at the numbers of Lamine in this very tournament. 1 goal, 2 assists, a match against Cape Verde, where he went completely missing for long stretches. His one-on-ones against Austria, where he was so bad that Edu Aguirre, who isn't exactly known for being critical of Barca players, said on El Chiringuito that they were figuring him out, that he'd need to play more down the middle, because once he beats one defender, he's already got 2 more on him. And in games against Portugal, where he clearly improved, but where all the credit for the win went to Ferran Torres coming off the bench, and Merino popping up in the 91st minute. Spain's best player in this World Cup isn't Lamine, it's Oyarzabal with 4 goals, with a clinical edge in the big moments that no other player in the squad has shown in this tournament. And yet, Lamine this morning is claiming that if Spain wins the World Cup, the Ballon d'Or is his. And he might be right, yeah. If on Tuesday he plays the match of his life, if he shows up when the team needs him most, if Rabiot is in front of him again, and he goes and scores the winning goal in the semifinal, if Spain reaches the final, and they win it with Lamine as the star. In that scenario, Lamine is dead right, because the Ballon d'Or isn't just won with stats. It's won with moments. Shared moments where the whole world stops and says, that player is just different from everyone else. Lamine had that in the Euros with his wonder goal against Mania. He hasn't had that yet in this World Cup, and if he has it this Tuesday, everything he's saying right now will go down in history as the most prophetic statement that any 18-year-old player has ever made. But if he disappears on Tuesday, if Rabiot shuts down his space, if France neutralizes him with the defensive plan Deschamps has been preparing for weeks, if Lamine has another game like the ones he had in the first part of this tournament where he just doesn't show up when he's needed, most than everything he said in the last few hours will weigh on him like a ton of bricks. The comments about the Ballon, the provocation directed at Rabiot about how Spain is going to beat them 3 times in a row, all of that could blow up in his face in a matter of 90 minutes. And there's something else worth adding before we wrap up, because in this whole story about Lamine and his comments, there's a piece of news that has gone almost unnoticed. But in the context of everything we're analyzing, it has a meaning that really needs to be pointed out. Ferran Torres, Lamine's teammate at Barca, and in the Spanish national team, the very same Ferran Torres who came on in the match against Portugal and assisted Merino for the winning goal, the same Ferran Torres who was the first option off the bench when Spain needed someone to change the game, that Ferran Torres has given the green light to an offer from PSG for 95 million euros. Yes, PSG, the very same PSG that Lamine is mocking this morning with his comments about the Ballon d'Or. The same PSG that has Mbappé and Dembélé, while Lamine is mocking the people taking his players along, his club and national team teammate is about to sign for that very same club for 95 million. That image speaks volumes about the complexity of what is going on in the Spanish locker room over the last few hours. And it says a lot about the pressure that Lamine is creating with his words, at a moment when Spain needs all of their focus to be on Tuesday's match. Is he doing the right thing, Lamine, by talking like this before the most important semi-final of his career? Or is he making the same mistake that Cristiano made before the match against Portugal, and the pitch answered him in the worst way possible? There is a fundamental difference between Lamine and Cristiano, because Lamine is 18 years old, and Lamine has the precedent of the Euros, where exactly the same pattern worked perfectly, and Lamine has enough talent for the pitch to prove him right on Tuesday, if he shows up at the moment that matters. But there is also something the Euros did not have, and that this World Cup definitely does. The stats showing that Lamine still has not found in this tournament the form everyone's expected, while Mbappé already has 8 goals and is still the best player individually in the tournament, beyond any debate, and Rabiot has been waiting 1 year for this rematch with intensity that his own statements over the last few hours confirm. On Tuesday, the pitch is going to answer everything we have analyzed today, and whatever that answer is, it is going to be the most iconic image of this World Cup. Lamine showing up when the match needs him most and proving that everything he said was true, or Rabiot getting the rematch he has been waiting 1 year for, and reminding Lamine that in football, words are worth exactly what the scoreboard decides they are worth. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Lamine is going to let his football do the talking on the pitch again, just like in the Euros? Or this time, is Rabiot going to shut him down? Does Lamine deserve the Ballon d'Or if Spain wins the World Cup with 1 goal and 2 assists in the tournament? And what do you think about Ferran Torres going to PSG while Lamine trolls the players from that exact same club? In the next video, we're bringing you the full analysis of Spain's match against France as soon as the final whistle blows. Don't miss it. Hit that like button if you think Lamine is going to play the game of his life on Tuesday and snatch the Ballon d'Or right from Mbappe. Subscribe if you haven't already and hit the notification bell. Lamine has spoken. Now it's time for the pitch to do the talking. And on Tuesday, in that semifinal, we're going to find out who was right. And before Tuesday gets here, there's something we really need to analyze with the depth it deserves. Because in this whole conversation about Lamine and his statements, there's one thing we're losing sight of: the context of what this match actually means for Spain. Spain enters this semifinal as the most defensively solid team in the tournament. Unai Simon hasn't conceded a single goal in the entire World Cup, and Cubarsí is probably the best center back of the tournament at just 19 years old. A defensive solidity that no other team has shown with that kind of consistency since the very first game. And they're also coming in with something France doesn't have right now: a different kind of hunger. France has reached 3 consecutive tournament finals. They've won one, and they have players who already know what it feels like to lift a trophy at this level. They have Mbappe, who did what he did in Qatar and is still the best attacker in the world right now. But they also have something Spain doesn't: the pressure of being the favorites, the pressure of knowing that if they don't make it to the final, with everything they've got in their squad, it'll be a historic failure. And that pressure, combined with Lamine's comments, combined with the memory of what happened at the Euros, combined with that Rabiot handball that the ref didn't call last night and that everyone is still talking about, could turn the match on Tuesday into something way more volatile, emotionally, than what paper and stats suggest. Lamine knows it. That's why he spoke out. Not because he's being irresponsible, not because he doesn't understand the consequences of his words, but because he learned at the Euros that when he speaks up before playing France, something clicks inside him that makes him play better. His own words prove it. When they asked him about that speak now moment from the Euro, Lamine said that his friends sent him, right before the game, Rabiot's comments, and that got him going. Because when someone tells him he can't do it, that he has to prove himself, that the stage is too big for him, something inside Lamine just lights up. That's why he speaks out. Not to provoke the opponent, but to fire himself up, to get himself going, to go into Tuesday's match feeling like he has something to prove. And if that works, just like it did at the Euros, it could turn the Lamine we see on Tuesday into the best Lamine we've seen in this entire World Cup. The problem is that scripts don't always repeat, that Mbappe isn't Rabiot, that Dembélé is different from the players France put in front of Lamine at the Euros, and that Deschamps has spent weeks studying how to shut Lamine down. Just like Nuno, Mendes shut him down in the first half against Portugal before getting injured. Edu Aguirre said it so clearly on El Chiringuito that deserves to be analyzed closely. They're starting to figure him out. Lamine beats one guy, and he already has 2 more on it, meaning he'll have to learn to play more through the middle, to not just rely on one-on-ones and to look for other options. When the opponent closes down his space with 2 players, that's what France is going to try. On Tuesday, closing down his space, always double-teaming him, never giving him that first yard of space he needs to be the player he was at the Euros. And if Lamine doesn't find a solution for that during the game, if he isn't able to adapt in real time to whatever France throws at him, all his comments from these last few hours are going to be flashed across the screens of every TV studio in the world during the 90 minutes of the match, reminding him of what he said, reminding him of what he promised, reminding him that Mbappe has 8 goals and that the Ballon d'Or isn't won with talk, it's won with games like the one Mbappe played last night against Morocco, and with performances like the one Lamine still hasn't had in this World Cup. That's what is at stake on Tuesday, not just its spot in the final, but Lamine Yamal'S story in this World Cup. And the answer to the question that the entire football world will be asking on Tuesday, when the opening whistle blows: is Lamine Yamal the player his words claim he is, or is he the player that the stats of this tournament suggest hasn't found his best form yet? We'll find out on Tuesday. And this channel is going to be here to tell you all about it. And there's one last dimension to all of this that we should look at before wrapping up. Because Lamine's comments aren't just about France, they're about something much bigger. They're about the Ballon d'Or, the most important individual award in world football. And when Lamine, he says that if Spain wins the World Cup, the Ballon d'Or is his. He is doing something that the great players of his generation rarely do so openly. He is claiming his place in history at 18 in a World Cup semifinal before even scoring more than one goal in the tournament. That might sound like arrogance, or it might sound like the confidence of someone who knows exactly what he's worth and who isn't going to wait for others to acknowledge it. It all depends on what happens on Tuesday, because the history of the Ballon d'Or is the history of the big games. Messi didn't win his first Ballon d'Or because of statistics. He won them because in the games where football is truly decided, he was the one who showed up. Mbappe has 8 goals in this tournament. That's an argument that no jury in the world can ignore if France reaches the final and wins it. But if Spain wins the World Cup, if Lamine plays the game of his life in the semi-finals against France, if he does to Deschamps again what he did to Deschamps in the Euros, if Spain reaches the final and wins, and if along that path, Lamine delivers those moments that the Ballon d'Or voters have been waiting months to see from him, then what Lamine is saying this morning isn't arrogance. It's a prophecy. The very same prophecy he wrote on Instagram before the Euros. Move in silence. Only speak when it's time to say checkmate. This time, he hasn't moved in silence. This time, he has spoken beforehand, and that might just be the biggest difference between what happened in the Euros and what could happen on Tuesday. Or maybe it's the ultimate proof that Lamine Yamal has learned that in football, words are also part of the game. That the pressure you put on your opponent with what you say before kickoff can be just as crucial as what you do on the pitch. That Rabiot is going to walk into the Tuesday match thinking about what Lamine said this morning. And that, in their very first head-to-head, could make all the difference between a Rabiot who plays with total freedom and a Rabiot playing under the heavy burden of knowing the entire world is waiting to see if he responds this time or if Lamine is proven right again. That's Lamine's gamble, and it's a massive one. A gamble that could pay off perfectly or backfire horribly. And on Tuesday, in that semifinal, we're going to find out which one it is. Until then, the only thing we can do is wait and gear up for what could be the biggest match in the recent history of Spanish football. Spain versus France, Lamine versus Rabiot, words versus the pitch, history versus statistics. On Tuesday, everything is on the line. And this channel will be right here to bring you every single moment from the very first minute. And there is one more thing that needs to be said about this whole situation. From Lamine in this tournament before that Tuesday comes around, because beyond the statements, beyond Rabiot, and beyond the Ballon d'Or, there is a question that Spanish fans have been asking themselves for weeks now, and it still doesn't have a definitive answer. When is the best Lamine going to show up in this World Cup? The Euros were his crowning moment, that wonder goal against Maignan, telling Rabiot to talk now, winning the Euros with Spain, the young Ballon d'Or, all in the same summer, at 16 years old. Since then, the level of expectation on Lamine has skyrocketed to a point where any game of his that isn't absolutely extraordinary is seen as a disappointment. And that, for a player who is only 18 years old, is a level of pressure that very few in the history of football have ever had to deal with. Lamine admitted it in an interview, saying that he only scored 1 goal in the Euros. And yet, everyone remembers him as the player of the tournament because he turned up at the exact right moments. You don't win a World Cup with stats. If you win the World Cup, nobody is going to care if you scored more or fewer goals. That's true. But it's also true that for that to happen, you first have to win the World Cup. And to win the World Cup, you have to get past France on Tuesday. And to get past France on Tuesday, Lamine needs to do something that so far in this tournament, he hasn't done consistently. Step up when the team needs him most, not when the game is already wrapped up, not when the opponent is already completely broken. But in those moments when everything is dead, even where the match is decided in the next 10 minutes, where the team needs someone to step up and carry the match on their back and win it for them. Oyarzabal did it against Austria. Against Portugal, Marino did it against Portugal. Lamine is still waiting for that moment in this tournament. And on Tuesday against France, with Rabiot standing in his way, with Mbappe and Dembélé on the other side, with everything he's said over the last few hours, echoing on every television screen in the world, He's going to have the biggest opportunity of his career to find it. If he finds it, the histories of this World Cup will have a name: Lamine Yamal, the 18-year-old kid who spoke up before the most important match, who proved it on the pitch, and went on to win the Ballon d'Or, stealing it from the two best players of the team most feared in the tournament if he doesn't find it. The history of this World Cup will also have a name, the exact same name, but with a different meaning. The kid, 18 years old, who talked too much before a match, and the pitch didn't forgive him. On Tuesday, we'll find out, and this channel is going to be right here to tell you all about it. No filters, no compromises, and with the exact same honesty that we've used to tell everything that has happened in this World Cup since day one.